Okay.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to more Zenna Party podcast, a podcast in which I am able to talk to my friends, talk to my family, talk to really whoever is willing to come on and share what they are passionate about, talk about what is going on in their life. I remember one of the first ones I did was with Ronnie Tucci, and I think about that one often. But we talked about how he's a chef and during COVID times and how that kind of affected his business and different things. I've talked to a number of different people, and so today I have a special guest with me. One I've been trying to get on for the last couple weeks, and she's been dodging me like a draftee in Vietnam. No, I'm just kidding. It's no, it's been some time in the making. Me talking, getting wanting to talk to her just about what she is passionate about, what she does for a living. And it was kind of cool how we got connected. I guess you were talking to my sister-in-law Keisha somehow. I don't know. I don't, or maybe God just laid you on her heart. But she texted me and I had been wanting to get back into recording the podcast. I've been gone for a number of months with the military, and I've been wanting to just figure out, okay, who can I talk to? Do I want to just be by myself, et cetera, et cetera? And she just texted me and was like, hey, you need to talk to Georgia Smith. And I was like, okay, like about what? And she was like, about mental health. And so then I think I texted you within the hour, right when she texted me that. And I was
Mhm.
like, okay, cool. Like I would love to talk to her. And so I texted you and we were able to finally get some time to sit down and talk. But without further ado, Georgia Smith, I've known for my whole life, I think. Um, and every time I saw her in the Tucson church, I'd be like, Georgia, Georgia. And
Yes, you would.
she'd be like, Aaron, shut up, quit. But without further ado, I want to give her ample time to talk. But Georgia, why don't you just introduce yourself to maybe some people that don't know you, where you're from, where you live, what you do for a living, anything you want the people to know.
So my name is Georgia Smith. It's always interesting when I go to introduce myself. Then I'm like, that's it. um, but I am a counselor. I specifically would be referred to as a therapist, but I move it towards mindset coaching, I like to call it instead, because for me, it's really about helping someone in their mind so that they can benefit from these changes in their personal lives so that they can thrive. So, my whole goal is not to simply say, how do you feel about this? It's to actually look at roots and problems to then help someone go further in their life and deal with those elements so that they're actually seeing that they can thrive on their own. And so I think my passion really came during going into counseling. I actually went to a school in Canada because the U of A didn't have the accurate program. So I had to like take like literally go to three different schools at one time in that 1 year at the end just to get my whole degree finalized. But the interesting thing is, in the world of, let me say, the United States, for instance, everything's more so fixated on, I'm going to help you, but you're going to need to keep coming back to me for counseling. So, but in Canada, it's different where they're more so about helping you so that you're leaving better, and if you don't come back, you're going to do better. So my approach was not to use the standard counseling approach that just gives you just little nuggets, and then the person's like, oh, I feel good for this week, but I'll be back next week with the next problem, you know? So that's where my real passion started, was in mindset coaching. And it really all stemmed from, honestly, the Olympics. I watched the Olympics so much and I love it. And I found out about sports psychologists in the Olympics. And so that's what I originally wanted to do, was to help athletes in their mind so they could perform better on the field or whatever they're doing. And that's when it started leading into counseling. And then I thought, cool, I can just house all these different things in one. And so that's really been like my passion. And specifically, I love working with couples, athletes, but I really love working with men and like their minds and understanding, just because I feel like they go through so much, but they kind of get overlooked. So I hope that answered some of
No,
those
it,
questions.
it, it definitely does. From a sports standpoint, maybe you could help me. I have what is called the yips. And so, have you heard of this?
No,
You really haven't heard? Oh, okay. So
no.
has this? Okay, so I was being silly, but in the sports world, you have what's called the yips, and that is where your mind just completely, and I might not even be describing this correctly, but your mind just completely plays a trick, if you will, on you, where you completely forget how to throw, how to hit. It's a real mental block, and I've had the yips in the past. Right now, I was kind of being silly with my softball league. I'm fine, but well, I'm decent. But in baseball, I remember I had it my freshman year of college, and literally played baseball my whole life. I could throw a baseball with my eyes closed and come within a radius of where I wanted to throw. Right. But my freshman year, all of a sudden, I mean, I couldn't, I was bouncing it. I was all over the place. And this is something a lot of people deal with, some longer than others. But yeah, it's called the yips, where you have and you just completely forget how to do it. And I mean, higher level athletes will go to sports psychologists trying to work through these things. And there's different ways to get out of it. But yeah, so that's the yips.
Interesting. Yeah, that
I'm not sure if it applies to like basketball. I'm sure it does. I'm sure it's applied to everything where you just kind of get these, mental block, but baseball
yeah.
specifically. But sorry.
No, that's interesting. I think that it's so funny because I'll just throw some terms there, but it sounds like the cerebral cortex is kind of going crazy, which is basically the part in the brain that looks at possibility. So it seems like it's kind of like shutting down. Usually, especially for guys, there's a reason for that, where it could even be something as simple as they just want to do so good that it almost takes away. Because, okay, the brain is very interesting. If the brain is already good at something and then you tell the brain, be really good at this, it actually does the reverse.
Huh.
So, in order for the brain to do well, you kind of have to just say, yeah, I know what I'm doing. Okay, just show up for me. And you show up and it does what it needs to do, because the brain's already on a program, so to speak. It knows, for instance, when you're driving, how do you drive?
What do you mean by that? Like, how do I drive in what
How
regard?
do you know how to drive?
Oh, it's just, I guess, second nature. Is that what you're?
Yeah, because you're backing out. You're doing a lot of different things
Oh,
when you're
okay, yeah,
driving.
yeah,
But
yeah,
at this point, your brain is the one running that whole ship when you're driving, when you're reversing, when you're knowing how to put on your seatbelt while you're still steering at the same time, grabbing something while you're still engaged in making sure you're safe on the road,
yeah.
right?
Maybe you
So,
don't want to know how I drive because that's exactly what I do. I'm all over the place.
how did I know that? This
I'm
is
like, okay, how fast are they going? Am I able to speed up a little bit more so I can cut in? I'm a race. I'm like, I'm on a track when I'm
So
driving.
you're like we've been seeing like these drag racers, these like F9 Fast Furious people doing these like, and they look actually, it looks pretty good, but I'm like, man, if that doesn't, if you don't hit that right on the spot.
Oh, I'm not that crazy, but I've done some insane things. I remember, yeah, I've done some insane things while driving, and I've done it out, and after the fact, I'm like, I can't believe I just did that. Like I wasn't even thinking clearly when I did it,
Wow.
and I'm like, I don't even know why I just did that. And I'll slow down, put my seatbelt on. I'm like, that was really stupid for me to have done. But
Wow. I'm glad you're driving by faith and not by sight. Just kidding.
amen, amen.
Please stay safe. Oh my. So with the yips for drive, you clearly don't have that when it comes to driving. But that's what I feel like is the overall perspective, is that the brain knows what to do. You have
Yeah.
to let it. So then you have to do things that kind of like program it. Like it could be someone's favorite song. Like Michael Phelps found that listening to his favorite song before he was going to swim kind of put him in the zone where that was all that mattered there. So his brain, you want to keep your limbic friction low and your body in homeostasis so that you can focus. So everyone has a different thing. Some guys, I found that them wearing a certain bracelet, like that is enough to like say, I'm going to do good today and they don't have to worry about things, you know? But ultimately, some of it is people pleasing. So they get kind of like, if I can't
Oh,
do well, what's going to happen?
yes.
Kind of like go through that whole thing.
Yes. And I guess I'm sorry to get stuck on the sports thing, but um, I guess from that perspective, you're definitely trying to please your coach. You know, you're
Mm,
trying to get playing time. You're trying to prove to others that you belong. You're
yeah,
trying to prove to yourself that you belong. And so you absolutely can have that, overwhelming mindset. It's like, if I don't perform right now, then am I going to get cut? Am I not going to
yeah,
see the field again? Especially in baseball. Baseball, again, I'm only speaking from a baseball perspective, but baseball, I mean, it's a game of failure. And that's everyone understands that as far as baseball players are concerned. I mean, if you hit 3 out of 10 balls, you're in the Hall of Fame, right? You hit
yeah,
300, you're a Hall of Famer. And so it's already a hard sport. But one of the things that you're talking about that was recommended to me to get my mindset out of the yips
mm,
was, I remember going aside with another teammate, and he said, "Okay, Aaron, I want you to throw the ball as hard as you can. Don't try and aim it to me. Don't try and think about it. Just throw it as hard as you could." And
mm,
so I remember I was like, "What? Okay." And I was just throwing it as hard as I could. And I bounced the first one, and I bounced the second one, and then all of a sudden, without thinking about it, without doing changing my mechanics, I was just throwing it as hard as I could to him, and eventually that worked. Just in that 10-minute time frame of throwing it as hard as I could at him, I was free from the yips.
wow,
And
wow,
so that's interesting that you say that a bunch of people have different ways of getting out of it, out of the, I guess, mental blockage. If I don't know what the correct term is, but that was what worked for me, was not thinking about it,
mm,
just throwing the ball as hard as I could,
yeah,
not trying to aim it, not overthinking it, just zipping it to him. So,
yeah. I love that. See, and
so
that's good. That's good because I feel like what you're saying too speaks to like all of life that I've seen is if you're trying to force something all the time, it's not going to work. If you just let it happen, it's like honestly God takes over and amazing things happen. But if you're trying to, do too much, like you just sitting in that moment of not thinking brings something to pass. So that's
yeah,
incredible.
set me
Yeah.
free. Now, did I see the field a ton after that? No, not necessarily. Did my playing time go up? Not necessarily. But it definitely it was nice. So you talked about how you went to the U of A for this for counseling, and then you went to Canada for it. But why this? People ask me all the time, why teaching? And I give, my story, my generic answer. Not generic, but like that's, where it stems from, my passion with teaching. Where I maybe this is a two-part question, but maybe when did you start thinking about it, and then when or why did you think counseling, and then when did you decide, say, this is what road I want to go down?
Yeah. Well, it's like it's a funny story and then it's not, but it's
Sure.
all different parts. But this part is funny is that apparently at 3 years old, believe it or not, in Africa, I really learned how to read early on. So it was interesting how easy reading and speaking came to me. But we had a guy that would come over from church and he would work in the back of our yard. He would do the yard for us and things like that. And I apparently was sitting outside with him at 3 years old, and he would smoke. And I remember his name was Marco. And he was always smoking, and that was just like his thing, was gardening while he was smoking. And apparently, I was speaking to him about how he could quit smoking, that it wasn't
Wow.
good for him. And I was telling him it's not good for you. You have to stop, yada yada, whatever. So not
That
long later,
church kid in you started coming out.
yeah. And so, like, not long later, Marco stopped smoking. And my dad asked him, "Hey, Marco, like, what happened? Like, what changed?" And he was like, "Georgia, Georgia, you're picking," because that's what a child. And he's like, "Your picking told me to stop smoking, and she really helped me." And so I find it interesting. I almost feel like counseling was like ahead of me before I knew it.
Mm,
And I say that to also say, like, the experiences that my parents faced in Africa were really surreal, in the sense where these things that you're seeing in the movie are really happening in real life, where people are having guns and shooting up the town, and they're leaving through the Civil War, and there's all this rebellion going on, and things that my mom experienced there, almost like levels of like PTSD and all this stuff, really contributed greatly to her overall mental health, making it so fragile for when they returned back to the States.
hmm.
And so, I mean, they left Africa under a haste, not like, oh, just voluntarily leaving. It was because it was in war. So a lot of things became war in her mind. And everyone's so different. Like, my dad dealt with that totally different than my mom did, you know?
Sure.
But with that being said, because of that experience, I grew up seeing into mental health in a different way than maybe other people may have, because it was like I was inside watching it, you know, watching how it happens and what happens in the mind. And so, being that was the case, I then decided that I wanted to actually go to school for to be a lawyer. So originally, I was really into that. I was going to take my LSAT, and I was so close to it. And then I remember my mentor telling me, he's like, "Georgia, you can't. This wouldn't be good for you." And I'm like, first off, I've come all this way. Like, you've been mentoring me this whole point and now. And so he just told me that the reason why it wouldn't be good is because ultimately he was an angry person, and that it's corrupt and there's so much corruption. And he was like, knowing you and your spirit, you're not going to be able to handle that kind of corruption. This is not something that I think you should do, because he was saying how he dreads it and hates it. So that like really shifted things for me and really kind of vexed me, just because mentally this is what I'm going to do, you know. And then all of a sudden it's like, should I do this? And so my following semester coming up, um Jessica would make my schedule for me for school. She just always did that. And so she made my schedule. Needless to say, I land in an abnormal psych class. And as soon as I start going through that class, I'm telling you, it was like I understood things that were being said, but I didn't know why.
Mm.
It was like it was foreign, but not. Like, the language made sense. And I stayed after, and I was talking to the professor, and I'm like, it just sunk in deeply, like, this is it, this is what it's supposed to be for me. And so I feel like my whole life kind of led to that point. People asking me questions along the way. There would be people that would just come up to me and say, "Hey, can you help me with this?" And I wouldn't understand, why are you like asking me these questions? But with all that being said, and my story, I think God was just shaping me for the whole thing. And so that's really how it began for me, and how my reason was to start helping people in their minds to be free.
I love that. And so you become a counselor, a therapist, a mindset coach, right?
Mhm.
And you said that you have either focused on men's mental health. Is that what you were saying? So,
Yes.
and also, I mean, it doesn't sound like, you're singling out and saying I only speak to men, obviously, but or maybe you do, I'm not sure, but you did bring that up. Why, what are some things that you're seeing? And this might be again a long answer, and feel free to take as much time as you want. But what are some things that you're seeing? Maybe some common some common things that you're seeing in men's mental health, maybe some common struggles, um, maybe some common things that men are dealing with, that they're coming to you, some problems that you're encountering um, amongst men.
So yes, it is a long answer, and yes, I do see men and women, but men, I think to start, I would say that men are very driven and they're free. Like we're all born free by nature is what God puts us in inside of us. We're free. But the world and the bondage that's in the world is what starts to pull away at that freedom, you know? So I think what I think I've seen or noticed for men is their freedoms being taken from them constantly and them over time kind of not standing up for themselves, so it started to deteriorate. So that means like speaking up. Now, like I've mentioned before to you when we talked, was like the feminist movement, so to speak, has started to kind of cause men to lean back and to be kind of scared and hindered in their ability to move forward. So the thing that I've noticed about men is they're very strong, but they're tender too. So if you're sitting down and you're shutting a man down over and over again, it starts to demasculate him to the point where he doesn't really have a role and he doesn't know what he's supposed to do.
Mm,
So when a guy doesn't have a role and he doesn't know what he's supposed to do, and men, given that they're assignment driven and God has given that to them, it starts to almost infiltrate itself as like an enemy in their mind already. Like they're already sabotaged in where they're supposed to go, what they're supposed to do. And then it leads them to depression. It leads them to not feeling like they have a purpose. And then it also leads them to feeling like they're failures, you know? And so when the man can't be himself, express himself, go out and hunt, play basketball, have fun, you know, be able to pursue after a woman and her actually receive him, be able to, you know, shine in his job, have ideas and express them. All those different things. When a man doesn't have that kind of system, he starts to kind of wobble on, well, who am I and why do I matter? And so I think the plot is to make men think they don't matter. That's what the goal and the agenda is, so that men start to kind of get disoriented in doing the things they need to do. Because without a man, honestly, it's like you can't go forward without that leadership. Men are so necessary and so needed in our generation for life, for women, for leadership as fathers, as teachers, in all different areas. So the goal of removing a man really starts to, I believe, mess with the whole mankind, to be
mhm.
honest. Yeah.
I, I agree with everything you're saying, and unfortunately, what you're saying can almost be deemed controversial. What you're
Mm,
saying, I don't know if you feel this way, but maybe it's because just my environment where I work, but saying you want strong men, or Jordan Peterson talks about strong masculinity,
mm,
not shying away from those things. Even Abigail Schreier talks about not shying away from
yeah.
masculinity. And what, I don't know, maybe you don't see this, or maybe you do, but what is the reasoning behind such a push for men to be feminine, or to, we hear all the time toxic masculinity, and what
Yeah.
that does? I mean, not for me. I really do. I mean, even in my classroom, I am about as manly as I can be. Like, hey, this is how a man should behave. I try and really um, exhibit manly characteristics, as far as like being a provider, being a protector. I remember we had a false alarm, thank God, but we had to go into a lockdown with a possible school shooter, which is scary. But I was at the
Yeah.
door, and I don't say this with any type of like arrogance or pride or anything like that, but I was at the door with my bat, like, hey. ready. I mean, I had kids in my classroom, but I was ready at the door. If someone comes in here, we're gonna, I'm gonna do what I can
Yeah.
to put myself in that front line to protect my students.
Yeah.
Why do you think, what's the drive? What's the push? What's the reason for such a demonization of masculinity? What's going on there?
Mm. I think it's the it's the agenda of weakening a man. I think that ultimately, when you strip a man down and you're asking him, how do you feel? How do you feel? How do you feel? Men aren't made like women in the instance where men can compartmentalize things very well. Women, they always say, are like spaghetti, where it's like everything is kind of all here and everywhere and mixed in from this, where that. But men are very easy at going, okay, I'm watching sports right now. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm at home right now. That's what I'm doing. Whereas like women are like watching sports and thinking about like the meal and this and that. You know what I mean? So I think that there's this false sense that women are falling like victim to, so to speak, that if a man can start wrestling with his feelings, he's relating to her, he is now close to her. They're in connection because he can say, oh, yeah, today when this guy looked at me this way, I really felt like he was judging me. And she could be like, oh, yes, I understand. I mean, I don't, the whole agenda is so interesting in itself, where a woman is almost saying, if you become like me, then we'll understand each other better,
Mm,
you know? And
yeah.
so,
Yeah. And so one of the things, I mean, and so let me ask you this. What is the balance? Because obviously you are there for the men to talk to. You are there for them to be encouraged, for you to walk through what's going on in their lives. So what is the balance of being tender, as you put it, and being strong, right?
mm,
So where can a man find that balance? Because again, for me, it's hard for me to be vulnerable. I'm sure just like a lot of men, for me to put myself out there and for, I'm gonna say this with air quotes, but to be judged for my wrongdoings or things I'm going through. A lot of men just compartmentalize. We keep it to ourselves for that reason. But obviously, men are number one in suicide. And then you have the military, which again, you have a
yeah.
whole separate issue of suicide and men not feeling like they can relate anymore or wanting to share their feelings, et cetera, et cetera. So, where can we find that balance of being open, but also being able to maintain that sense of dignity and pride in ourselves, if you will? I don't know if that's the right word, but that sense of masculinity, that sense of man, but also being vulnerable.
Yeah. I think, well, I think it all first starts with going into your heart. What I mean by that is like cultivating your routine and your time with God. I do believe that, like, for instance, if you wake up, you're worshiping, you go on a run, you have a good workout, you listen to something encouraging, you're writing some notes on stuff, all of those kind of elements, believe it or not, are flowing poetically. To sing and to worship is an essence of, artistic expression. And that's vulnerable for a man to do, to lift up your hands, to say that you're not superior and you need God.
Mm, come on,
That's already bringing you to a humbling place.
come
So I
on.
feel
Yeah.
it starts to make the divide very clear of where you are, where God is, and that you need Him. I think the other thing is when you understand you have a need, it introduces your ability to then reach out to people because you understand, honestly, we all have a need. We've all fallen short. So, truthfully, I think you start to see the wrestlings happen when you think that you're more than what you are. It's like what we talked about in the beginning with the yips, you're literally going out there just like thinking too much and then it goes away. Whereas if you were to just go out and just be Aaron, be yourself, you're sitting down to go, okay, I'm bringing this to the table and that's good enough for me because it's good enough for God and not because it's good enough for this person or that person. When you start falling under rules and regulations, I believe that that's when it can get interfering in a man's mind. He's like, oh, I have to be this way. I have to do this. And it's like, no, no, no. You have to do what God has you to do. And the only way to know that is the intimacy that you have with God. So I think that the person that I look at the most is King David because this guy's
Come on,
out there.
somebody. Come
He's
on.
like playing the harp, right?
Yep.
He's taking care of the sheep. But
Yep.
then this guy's a boss. Like he's killing lions, he's killing bears. Like he's not sitting down and like
Yeah.
he's showing you the different intricate parts of his heart. And then he's able to also be like, oh my gosh, I messed up. Like, help me, Lord. Like,
Yeah.
I realize, it's funny because the prophet comes to David and he's like, you are this man. Like David's like,
Yeah.
who is this man? Like
Yeah.
after being read himself, he's still like, who is he? And then he's like, it's you. And he's like, oh, like I think that's the version of men that they kind of have to come to is self-reflection to be like, I am that man. Like I am messed up in this way or that way. And that doesn't mean that I'm lesser than. It means I have an understanding about this. What do I do with it? How do I start? Well, first, I repent. And then in that repentance, God brings out things in me that allows me to be more vulnerable. So then when you're talking to other men, there's a saying that says you can only meet people as deeply as you've met yourself. So if you've
Mm.
only seen at the surface so long and you haven't allowed God to show you the deep parts of yourself, when you're talking to another guy, all you're going to talk about is the standard, like, yeah, man, how are you doing? Yeah, God is good, brother. And that's about it. But when you're vulnerable and deep, you could be like, hey, so how's it been going for you over there? Like, I know that you guys went through various like storms and things like that. How's your mind? There's a deeper ability to connect. And that's necessary. Men need that. Adam failed to say anything to Eve. And I think that him being the first male, that is something that men have to grapple with constantly is not saying anything. Lack of communication to say, I'm having a problem with this is one of the reasons why it leads to suicide. When we worked with soldiers during COVID at Davis Monthan Air Force Base, most of them had the problem that they just weren't saying it out loud vocally. They were thinking it. And when you think something in your brain, it gets jumbled. Your brain's always going to try to prove you right. So if you say someone hates you, your brain is going to try to point out pictures to you that why that person hates you and try to confirm it. Confirmation bias is what it's called. So ultimately, if you're not speaking it out loud, you're not going to be able to actually know, wait, does this make sense? Like, let me just talk my thoughts out. If you just talk your thoughts out openly, you will be able to actually go, that makes no sense. Like, I don't believe what I'm
Mm.
actually,
Yeah.
you know? So silence really does a man terribly. That's another thing.
King David is a great example. Actually, my brother brought that up as well. Um, because I think we were talking about worship and how it is a little bit more difficult for men to see themselves as a bride, right? As a
Mm,
bride of Christ, to surrender ourselves and throw up our hands in an act of surrenderance. And King David, I often, as far as worship is concerned, I think about when he stripped himself down and he took off his crown and he stripped himself of everything that signifies like I am something, right? I'm a
yeah.
king. He took it all off. And then, his wife gets mad. And I heard this one pastor say, you know, David is like conveying to her, this isn't for you. This is between me and God. And so I
Mm,
think that a lot of times men can fall into a trap of constantly feeling like they have to be something that they're not.
yeah.
And so then it just becomes too much rather than really, like you said, it's about the intimacy with Christ, with your Savior. Like
Yeah.
that's what it's about. Everything else will follow suit.
Yeah.
Everything else will find its place. But if you can get to that relationship with Christ where you are in a place of surrender, it's like, hey, this is about Jesus. This is about Christ and my
Yeah.
relationship with Him. Are you always bringing up your faith when someone comes to you, or how does that? Are you bringing it in? Are you maybe talking about? I mean, I'm not saying spiritual, or how are you always bringing that in, or are there things that you kind of leave out, or what type of counseling would you provide someone if they were just to walk in your door?
Well, honestly, I always bring it in. It always
Love that.
ends up coming in. And
Yeah,
my whole thing is, it's like if you're going to Target, right? You know what you're getting from Target. If you go to Target and you're like, "Well, I was really wanting something from Walmart," and they're like, "Okay, well, this is Target." So I'm always telling clients when they come to mental finesse, like, this is what it is. This is where I stand on this. I'm always gonna pray for you afterwards,
yeah,
whether or not you believe or not, that's fine. But it's interesting because clients that are secular will often text me or email me and say, "Hey, guess what? I prayed for myself today and it was great." Like,
love that.
honestly, so I've always stuck to that because at the end of the day, I always said that God was the owner and operator of mental finesse. So when I go into conversation with people, they're always searching for something, and it usually comes up on their own. But yeah, I definitely always stick to my faith because that's what I'm gonna do. You know.
So growing up, um, maybe you can relate to this. I'm not sure, but I felt like going to therapy, especially while being a part of the church,
Mm,
was viewed as a negative. Maybe
mm,
not like you're kicked out of church or people are like, you know, like what are you doing? But it was like, what's the point? You have a church family, you have a pastor that you could talk to. Why do you need to go to a therapist, if you
mm-hmm.
will? So, and again, I don't want to be speaking out of turn because maybe that was just my immature thinking. I don't know if that was ever actually conveyed or anything like that, but it was something I was thinking about. If that is the case, why do you think some churches might, or maybe in the Christian world, why do you think that is? Why do you think there is that you don't need to go. This isn't real, or um, depression isn't real. I don't want to put that on anyone else, but I have heard that these things aren't real, um, and it has come from the church world, um, as well as the world. Uh, why do you think that is? Why do you think there maybe is that disconnect from the church to therapists to mindset coaching? Um, Maybe it's not real, I don't know, but I feel like I have seen that. Maybe you have as well.
Yeah, I think, honestly, it sadly took like COVID to kind of break through on that for
Mm,
some sides with church, so to speak. Because I've seen it come a long way. Mental Finesse was established like 5 years ago. And so in that beginning point, it was so different than it is now. Now it's so like needed and necessary in the way people see it differently. But I think to start, a lot of times people have this persona that when you come and you get saved, it's almost like you're thought that you're being saved from everything, that you're no longer going to go through anything. And to be honest, the scripture literally says that great are the afflictions, and so it's the complete opposite of just because you're saved, it doesn't mean that you're not going to go through anything. It's that you're saved, you're going to have Jesus to help you. And so I think that understanding can come from every area, because just because you're saved doesn't mean you're going to have a six pack, right? Because you're saved, you want to take care of your body, you're going to have to find a regimen of what you need to eat, how you need to sleep, how you need what your water intake needs to be, all of those things to then obtain this six pack. So I use that example to say it's in every area. If you want to do good at something educationally, well, for instance, you being a teacher, it's like you saying, I'm saved, so that's all. And they're like, well, you need to take this test, you need to do this for your curriculum. And you're like, no, I'm saved. And
yeah.
so I think that like there's this understanding or thought that because you're saved, it kind of casts aside the fact that you're going to have stuff to deal with. And God has given us people for a reason within the community to help us. You go to a doctor when you're having problems with certain things. It's that same thought when you go to see a counselor. I think the main um thing that the church has understanding for is there are some hubu jubu counselors. So
Sure.
what I mean by that, there's some counselors that I've spoke to clients who've come in from previous counselors who are just agreeing with them on everything. They've had kids that they're seeing that are like, oh yeah, it's fine if you don't listen to your parents. It's your choice. So you have counselors that are now almost like siding with people's stupidity, so to speak, that that is not the area of basis you want to go with. So you want to go with someone who is saved, to be honest, because if they're not going to impart biblical principles, I do think that that's already going to be a shifty ground. And now it's like a lot of times people are like walk on hot coals and sit outside for 5 hours. And so
Yeah.
these are the things that I think the church is obviously like, hey, let's not get involved in these things that are a slippery slope for ridiculous aspects that aren't of God. So it's mainly about finding the counselor that's rooted in God. And that's what I would say. But um, I do think that yeah, people think depression, certain people have said that they don't think it's real. And it is very much so real to that person.
Hmm.
And you're on earth. So in a fallen world, those things are going to be real. Whereas if you're in heaven, they're not. So there's the purity in heaven, and then there's the sinful nature of the world. So I think that's the understanding is that there's things you're going to face down here that are going to be episodes of things that aren't always the best.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think that it's important. And to even outside of the church, I think there is something to be said about finding that Christian counselor, being able to talk to them about real things going on in your life that, for the good or bad, you might not feel comfortable telling your pastor about.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. Maybe, and I don't think there should be any shame in that. I mean, if you're going to a Christian counselor, that you're able to just maybe be a little bit more open than you
Mhm.
were, and if that's what it takes to be held accountable, to confess your sins to one another, going to someone else, then obviously, I'm not saying you should hide anything from your pastor. I mean, if you're in, you know, get into religious terms, but if you're in like open or willing sin, I'm not talking really about that, but maybe just like the everyday struggles that you can find someone to talk to relate to. I don't think there should be, again, any shame in that. But I understand too what you're saying, and what the church has come across as charlatans, people trying to sell you a false good. Which you kind of alluded to that with, you saw a difference in the U.S. and in Canada, where in the US, they're trying to really get you to come back.
Mhm.
And I feel like, too, with the US, I mean, more now than ever, I mean, we're so medicated. We're
Yeah.
so medicated.
Yeah.
Uh, how does mental finesse differentiate from just your average counselor, where you come in and maybe that average counselor wants you to automatically is like, okay, we're going to write your prescription.
Mhm.
Um, what does mental finesse do? Like, what are we trying to accomplish when we come in there?
So we are trying to accomplish a whole person, someone who is going to leave whole. So it starts with kind of looking at where they are right now and what areas we need to tackle to start them on their way. And so, honestly, a lot of times for each person, it starts with forgiveness.
Mm,
And that's,
love that.
believe it or not, the truth, because there is almost a grieving process for every person, whether you've experienced loss of someone dying and leaving this earth, or just loss in your own life that you consider to be something where you didn't do well or failed. Those are grievances. So, there are things that need to be let go of in that area before real work is begun. So once that's begun, then there's all kinds of different things that we can have that person do. For some people, it's nutritional, it's sleeping, we've done walk talk therapy. There's people that want to work out, so we've made workout plans for them. There's so many different aspects to what we do for helping someone in their whole selves become better. So whether that be cognitive behavioral, where it's someone, cognitive behavioral therapy is to replace something with something else.
Hmm.
So like for people that have struggled with alcohol, when Christmas was coming up, one of the things we found effective was that they would ask for, half cranberry, half like Sprite or something like that nature, and to be holding a glass with them, already setting themselves up for knowing, okay, I'm going here, what's going to help me with this? I'm not going to reach for this, I'm going to reach for that instead. Someone who struggles with overeating, getting a smaller plate, so there are things that we really start addressing for people that are very simplistic, but start to empower their brain to saying, oh, I can make decisions by myself. When people realize that they can make decisions by themselves, I think ultimately that's what starts to change their lives. When they don't know if they can make decisions by themselves and they're leaning to the left and right, that's when we find a lot of problems. So the main thing is it's different for every person. So it's kind of hard to narrow in on, but it
Sure.
really comes down to just looking at where that person is. What is their routine right now? And how do we change that routine so that it's going to start helping them in their mind? If they're alone too much, that's a problem. Being
Mm,
alone too much will always be an issue because it's
yeah.
all about you. And then you really do have problems because you're just by yourself to confirm them constantly, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like as well is I saw this throughout the COVID crisis with isolating yourself, not going to work, men and women, but men in work, we find a purpose. And
Yeah.
when you strip us of that purpose, you're saying, you're, well, what are we going to fill our time with? What,
Mhm.
how do I identify then, in that? And so you really did see just, I mean, and in the youth as well, just suicide rates just spike with that and with men as well. Um, Women, what are some issues that, so we talked about men, um, what are some things you might be seeing in women as well as far as mental struggles are concerned? Maybe some common factors.
I think for women, it can be overthinking, a level of comparison, a
Mm,
level of, kind of a lower self esteem due to that comparison. It kind of all starts to come down. They compare, then the level of self esteem drops down, then the overthinking settles in, then kind of like the whole, jumping off the ledge, I call it, is finally what happens because they're like, oh, I can never do this. So it's like if they see another mom doing great and they're like, well, I don't do that. So then they immediately now have a lower self esteem of themselves. Then they're like depressed in that mentality. Or women who see, women who are doing well in their relationship but no one's coming after them, so then they kind of, so I've seen that again. It's women too not having a purpose is what also messes with them, but in a different way. Like you see, for instance, like Ruth, when she ends up going with Naomi and they go, and they she leaves the Moabite way of life and goes with Naomi, you're noticing that she starts working right away. She's not
yeah.
just like, "Oh, I'm just gonna stay home and be cool." And like the same thing with the Proverbs 31 woman that I find common too, is this woman knew about things. She knew how to hunt. If you read that scripture, it's pretty amazing. Like she knew what was going on in the city. She knew about furs. She knew about the market. She knew how to engage with all these different kinds of people, which was what made her be who she was. So there was a certain level of intellect and purpose that she had. So I think that when women don't really know what they're doing and they're kind of just like, well, I'm just going to sit here and wait for tomorrow, wait to go back to school, wait to get married, wait. Life is just passing them by and they're getting more and more resentful.
Mm. I heard that's yeah. I heard a quote as well where it said, "Comparison is the thief of joy,"
Mhm.
and I mean, obviously, that's so true, and it's good too. I mean, Ruth. she was able to be a follower too. So she was able to be a disciple. Where you go,
Yeah.
I'll go. What you
Yes.
say, your God is now my God. And
Yes.
and so I think that's for men and women, where you are able to put yourself, again, kind of coming back to the humility side of things, but really understanding, like, finding someone, a mentor, a pastor, a pastor's wife, someone who has gone through the fight, and
Yeah.
saying, how did you do it? I want to, I want to be a follower. I want to go where you go, and then being vulnerable in that, and being open with him. And I think that's, going to be a huge difference maker in your own mental health.
Yes.
And I'm not saying I'm definitely not perfect in that, in that regard, where it's being open, being vulnerable. But I think
Why
that's,
is
was that?
why is that?
'Cause I'm a man. I think possibly because being in the church, being a pastor's kid, you
Mm,
are held to a standard that maybe isn't always fair, maybe is fair, maybe it's just you're held to a Christian standard, and that's, so be it. But I think there is at times been that, you can't mess up, because you are the pastor's kid, and that reflects poorly on the church, on your parents. Uh, and so it is, I don't really deal with this anymore, but there has been times as a kid where you're like, I'm just not going to say anything,
mm,
because I don't want it to come back and bite my parents in the butt. Even though
yeah.
my high school, I actually did do something in my high school senior year where I didn't make my parents nor my church look super great. Um, but I think that was because what was in the heart finally kind of came out in the
Mm,
physical sense, where I acted out, in a negative way, uh, because I wasn't communicating, because I was hiding things. And so it finally ended up being, you know, an outward display of negativeness. Do you see
mm,
that? Do you see that often, where people hide things too much, and then it kind of reveals itself in an outward thing, and then they come to you and they're like, I messed up.
yeah. Yeah, and it's funny because I think sometimes that person is like, "I messed up," but they're, like, relieved almost because 'cause they're like,
Mm,
"Oh, thank God." Like, this is finally not, like, something that has power over me anymore. Because ultimately, something that you're not able to talk about is ultimately sucking power from you too. So while it's,
yeah,
like, exciting, then it's like then you get distorted because you're constantly wondering if someone knows. So as soon as someone looks at you, you're like, they know. Like it kind of makes the whole world kind of look like it's like
yeah,
seeing stuff. So when you actually announce it, you're like, oh, I feel so much better now. And I think that's the thing too, is like there's a lot of people that just want to come and talk about their wrongs because they're like, I just need to say this. Like I can't like keep this here anymore. I just want to like blurt it all out. So they'll come and just like ugh, like for an hour. And we've had people that like an hour they never stop talking because they were just saying stuff. Like nothing had
wow,
a flow. It was just all the things within their heart that were finally like spilling over, you know?
yeah. Well, I want to be respectful of your time, but I want to ask you two more things. What
Okay.
can um what can the church world do differently to encourage and empower people to be more open to talk, about things, um, maybe not to hide, and obviously it's a biblical thing. We shouldn't be hiding our sin anyways. We should be always open with one another and talking about things. But reality is reality. There are people who don't feel comfortable in that, and maybe it's because the church world has demonized therapy and demonized, um, mental coaching, mindset coaching. What can the church world, so I'm a part of that, you're a part of that. There's a lot of people that listen to this that are a part of a church community. What can we do differently to encourage and empower one another to, hey, if you need to go see a counselor, Christian counselor, go do it.
Mm. Yeah, I think it comes down to the mindset of what you view church to be. There's a lot of people that have the perception that church is a perfect place with perfect people that are doing great, and that's why they're there. But the church is actually a hospital, and it's filled with so many people that
Come on,
are in need of a savior. So
come on.
they're all suffering in some different way, mentally, physically. And just because you're wearing a suit doesn't mean that you're not having a problem in your
Uh-oh.
mind. And so I think that we have to be like really honest with what you perceive the church to be. And when you have that honesty, then you're able to go, oh, this person needs help, and that's okay. That's expected. Like everyone in a hospital is being treated for something different. And no one in the hospital, if you think about it, is like, why are you here?
Yeah, yeah.
uh, you look fine. Like they like, I mean, God thankfully is the one who does our x-rays, right? So he's like, yeah, you look great on the outside. He's like, but let me tell you, over here in the heart, the colon over here, the liver over here, the unforgiveness that you don't let go of over here, the comparison, all these things are mental elements that people, they think that because they only suffer with comparison, they're almost privy to being like, well, that's cool, I'm not depressed, but you're still, comparison is still something you need help with. So I think that if everyone has that understanding that they're all there for a reason because we need God, then you're going to be under the understanding that it's normal to have something go on. The problem with when something goes on and people have an issue with it is because they treat it like it's abnormal. So that's what causes there to be conflict to say, well, why does this exist at all? But it's completely normal that these things do exist, and to have someone else help you and walk through it with you, with good Christian guidance and sound mind, and having people around you that are like-minded to help you in the congregation that can sharpen you and you could stay accountable to and you can talk to things about, that's going to pull you through quicker than you trying to just harness it in and be by yourself in it. You know what I mean? And so I think the church world can do better at just understanding where they're at and speaking from that place is going to create a level of vulnerability that makes things a lot easier, you know. And I think you said something so good about the willingness to follow Ruth, following Naomi, and a man being able to follow, having that discipleship, being willing to be able to follow someone, and being willing to know each person's role is very effective too, because I think if women don't let men be men, and women are trying to be more masculine or bring that into the church realm too, it creates division to not allowing those kind of things to be fostered. So it's important to be able to say, there is a leadership here. We're able to follow this and have understanding and see good things happen and make room for that too.
I love it. I want to, something came to mind, and
Mm,
if uh if this doesn't go the right way, I might just cut this out. But as a church kid, you see, uh, we've both grown up in church, and there's not many there. How do I put this? There's not as many church kids that I started with that are still here, still in the church, still serving God, still on fire. And it seems like when a church kid, and I'm using that term generously, uh, but it seems like when, because not everyone, that's why I say that, not everyone, but they grow up in church, and when they decide that they no longer want to serve Christ, they go off the deep end. And I mean off the deep end. Start doing things that I know kids that I went to college with and played baseball with, that they would look at that and be like, "What are you doing? Like, Well, I would never do that. And they didn't go to church. They don't know anything about the Bible. And they would look at that and say, "What are you doing? Why are
Yeah.
you why are you going so why are you doing crazy things like that?" And it's these church kids who, I don't know, maybe, man, I don't know. I guess my question is, and maybe you've seen that before, maybe you can relate to that. Is that why is that happening? Why are some man, it's just like I can name five right now, just off the top of my head, that went off the deep end. Why is that happening? What can we do differently? What can parents do differently? What maybe can I do differently as a friend, as a believer? Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah.
With friends, and I know this is kind of away from the mental finesse, but uh, maybe just as a friend or as a fellow Christian, what can we do differently? Maybe seeing it to be true, or am I just out to lunch?
Well, I think it's really um the upbringing at home that
Mm-mm.
really changed this. I mean, if I can only speak for myself, the reason why I personally didn't want to go to the deep end, I think, well, a lot of it was God, because personally, like, that's the main thing. But the other aspect was my dad would sit down with me and my sister and look at songs with us. And I always discuss this, like, whatever we gave our thought towards, he wouldn't just say, "That's stupid, take that away," whatever. Like, for instance, I remember when I started really liking um drumming. I like loved guys that could drum really good. And I really landed in on Travis Barker. And he's over here covered in tattoos.
Yeah,
And my dad was like, okay. And I remember I was like, there was like all these like teen magazine kind of things with these, that was growing up like in the 90s, whatever. And I stuck Travis Barker on my wall like 100%. And my dad had understanding for why he was on my wall, not because he's on my wall because I'm just trying to like, be just this person in the flesh or whatever. I really had respect for him. My point in saying these things was that my dad would level with me and my sister in a place where he would talk to us about something where it would personally inspire us to be convicted. So he would be like, well, why is this person saying this in this song? Why is this lyric this way? And then we would go and be like, I don't know. And he's like, well, what is it showing you? And then when I'd answer back, I'd realize it wasn't showing anything good. And he would kind of just walk out the room. And later I'd be like, I'm not listening to that song again. Like, it was, so we would have conversations with my parents that were really like, um, of this world kind of conversations. And I don't think that that happens anymore today. I think that parents are just like, be good, don't be bad, but no one is walking their child through like what it means to do better, or why, or what's not working, or how it could be better in that way. And I think that can come down to how they were parented too. I don't know, but I ultimately think that it comes down to not leaning in to have understanding, because I've seen the same case with like Amish um kids. There was like a documentary done when they went into the deep end their lives, and a lot of it was because they weren't able to properly communicate with their parents. So when they got out, they're like, I'm going to do everything I want to do, because that's what the flesh wants. It's like the more you are not able to speak to the truth on something and explain the truth to your kid, raise up a child in the way he should go, if they're not being raised up properly, they will depart from it. They won't care. And later they'll make a lot of different decisions that they almost feel like they're entitled to doing, because, like, why not? They don't know if it's really going to be that way or whatever. So it's a hard one. It really is.
it is, and it really just breaks my heart, um, because I want to see them, number one, make heaven their home, but also, they're friends, they're people you grow up with that are a part of your life, and
Yeah.
then they're not. And then you check in on them and they're doing, I'm not going to say any examples because if they listen to it, they might know who I'm talking about. But then you just hear it. what they're doing, and you're like, man, what is going on? It just breaks your heart. One of the things my parents often said was, it's important that you can fail in this home. You can fail here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so I'm not sure and again, I'm not casting judgment at all because the kids are the ones making their decisions, right? But I don't know if that is always conveyed to them in the home where you can fail here.
Yeah. I love that. I love that
And
because there it's like a training process at
yeah.
home. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know how much grace is given in the church that they grew up in or anything like that. And I think that's probably what we can do better as well, is to make sure we're sharing grace and making them feel grace, because we give grace to the down and outer that comes in, to the person that comes in and they're not saved and never heard about Christ, and we're like, oh my gosh, absolutely, like, and we give them so much love and so much room to grow, and it might take months and months for them to stop cussing and to move out with their girlfriend or whatever it is, and you're just like, I understand it, I get it, right? No one's perfect, it's going to take time, but sometimes it's not always that grace isn't always extended to the church kid who we believe should know better and that they
Yeah.
should never mess up.
Yep.
And to if they do mess up, you're like, why in the world did you do that? And then they
Yeah.
feel like, wow, I'm just not going to say anything because I don't want to feel that way. Like I should have
Yeah.
known better. And
Yeah.
you should have, okay, but here's grace, you know.
Yeah, and that's why I would tell you too, like how you said you still do check-ins and stuff. I think that's the example to set because a lot of times I think grace keeps going even when a person like says I don't want anything to do with this anymore and you're still constant to remaining reaching out to that person. It doesn't mean like you're hanging out with them every day or whatever, but you're sitting down to have a standard where you say I have love and that love doesn't just say that you're not in church anymore, so now I can't speak to you and I can't check in on you, because I do think that's what happens too is people are like, well, you're not here, so I'm just never gonna like check in on you. And it's like, but what is that, like what you just described, what we would do it to someone else, that had
Yeah,
just got saved, to follow up on them and see how they're doing you
yeah.
know yeah.
Georgia, you got some books for us to read? You got anything that you'd like to recommend for some people?
My favorite book, it's so funny, but it's by John Eldridge and it's Wild at Heart. And it's Wild at Heart, Discovering the Secret of a Man's Soul. That is, I literally, it sounds so funny, but it's one of the first books I ever read in my dad's library when I was probably like 7 or 8. And it changed my life, like genuinely. Because I just think, it really showcases what men are and why they're necessary. And I think it blesses a man's heart to read and a woman's heart to read because she'll have understanding for it, and like the leadership that's necessary, and just allowing a man to be a man and you know pursue forward, especially in this generation where that's what women really need you
Yeah.
know yeah.
A man to be a man in the sense like asking a girl to dance and going up to her and introducing
Yeah.
yourself and not shying away from those things and being confident.
Yes, where is that? that
Come
is
on.
That's what I was talking to your sister-in-law about. We were saying like, where are these men that we don't understand where they went? But like in the church realm, in the church realm, I hope it gets stronger because like I was telling you about before this, I had to have this guy at the gym help me get a bar down because I couldn't reach it. And he was so grateful. I've never seen someone so grateful in their life to help me. Like he was like, "Thank you so much." And I'm like, he's like, "Is there anything else I can do for you?" Like it was like a concierge service. I was like, just kidding. But he literally was, and I asked him, I was like, why is there so much, like there seems like you're so excited by this? And he's like, well, he's like, now if you open a door for a woman, apparently he opened a door for a woman and she literally scolded him and was like, I can open the door myself, I don't need you to do that. And so he was like, after a few of those happening, he kind of like laid back on thinking, man, like women think they can do everything, I'm not going to do anything for them. So
Mm.
I get like that's scary because this is in the world being said. So then in church, when you're seeing that, do you think it's the same thing? Do you think guys are scared at church to go up to a girl? Like, I mean, in my case, me and my sister, I know we're pastors' kids, yada yada, and people are like, "That's Alvin Smith's kid." But if you can walk up to me, that's like that's already like $1 million, right? But my point is, why is that so scary?
Probably just rejection. Um,
Mm,
Probably just that. No one likes feeling rejected. No one likes feeling like you're not wanted. I'm probably not the best person to talk to that about because I my mom she instilled in me at a young age and all of us a confidence not really in how we look or how we are, but in who God made us to be. And
mm,
so whether it was good or bad, I've always walked around with a certain type of confidence that has allowed me to be able to make friends, has
mm,
allowed me, and having five sisters definitely has allowed me to talk to girls, and be friendly with them and talk to them. Um, and so, but trust me, I'm not married, um, but I've had my fair share of rejections in the dating world of I'm interested in a girl and she's not interested in me. And I think when I first started, oh man, how do I put this? When I first started to make myself available, it was kind of like after college when I was done playing baseball. I was done, with my degree, and I started kind of putting myself out there. Um, the first time you DM a girl, and I hate to say that but reality is that a lot of things are online these days. Dating is online. If you're not coming across them, I don't go to the bar. I only come in contact really with people as like at the store and at the gym. So when I first DM'd a girl, I was like, nervous. It's like, oh my gosh, like this is
mm.
scary stuff right now. Like, oh my gosh, like but then you get rejected, and then it kind of becomes easier, and they're not all swing and misses. But I think when you first are maybe afraid to take that initial step of, okay, how do I talk to this girl, or what do I say? And then you do get rejected, or maybe it works out. It becomes a little bit easier the next time and the next time after that.
Yeah,
Um, I think one of the things too is men, especially in the Christian world, is maybe they don't always view talking to a girl as um, just a simple act of wanting to get to know her, rather than because sometimes they might look at it like, if I talk to this girl, it could lead to marriage, and they automatically start thinking like the biggest of picture rather than just saying, okay, let's get to know each other and see where it goes, and then maybe we I can start thinking down the line. I know I've been guilty of that where it's like I'm not even going to talk to her because I couldn't see myself down, and that might have saved me some heartache and some problems. But I don't think that's always maybe a good type of thinking where you don't even allow yourself to get to know the person because you're like, oh, I'm not even, there's no point. Um,
yeah,
there's probably a balance in there somewhere.
yeah.
Uh, I don't know if that made sense or not.
No, it's good. I mean, it's so different. I like the way you described it. Your mom is like the best woman ever. I mean, I got the honor of being in your guys' house like so many times. Like pretty much every Sunday after church, I was going over to your guys' house when you guys moved down here. So it was the best. But being around your mom was so instrumental in what she really does speak into your life, and like you said, the confidence. So there's that certain level, but it's interesting when you were talking about how once the first rejection comes, you kind of gets easier, so to speak. I think guys actually, it's funny because I think guys are more vulnerable than girls are, and girls don't maybe realize that. They're like, just come up to me. And the guy's like, no, like,
Yeah.
so, but I think that guys kind of like settle themselves out too quickly because intellect, being able to be smart and just have a conversation is very simple. But I do think it's fascinating to me that if you look even in the 90s, a guy will say, I know that's my wife. Like, I know I'm going to go talk to her. But now guys are like, oh, like it's like a whole genre of questionnaires. And I don't know if it's because of all the traumas of
Mm, yeah.
today, probably. But yeah,
I think what you're saying too about men not being able to necessarily be themselves and be masculine
yeah,
can definitely be a setback in probably how they view themselves and probably how they think they should be viewed. I think if you were to bring back masculinity in the sense like, hey, be confident in who you are. I'm not talking about like, being a jerk and being a douchebag and stuff like that, but being
yeah,
just like confident, hey, I'm a hardworking man. I want to provide for you. Um, if we have the opportunity for you not to work and stay at home with our kids, then I would like to do that. Unfortunately, today's economy, it's not, this, might not be plausible, but that's just being open with those things like, hey, that's my goal, as a man,
yeah,
as a provider, as a protector. But,
yes,
uh, you know, I wouldn't even say that to certain women because they would be like, you're disgusting and misogynistic and, you know,
right.
so it is probably I live in a small town, but in a bigger city in Tucson, or Phoenix or wherever you go, men are probably guaranteed to be 100% more careful in how they communicate, how they initially come off, and how they present themselves. Because okay, am I going to be viewed as some crazy guy, or how do I want to present myself?
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. Do you think if a woman is doing well for herself in a career or what have you, then a man is less likely to think that he has a place there? Because see, I think that's the interesting thing too, is like women are a lot more educated in a certain sense. Even the homemaker now, a
Oh,
lot
without a
of them
doubt.
is before, you know what I mean? So my whole point is that do men think that because a woman is doing something that he can't still meet a need, and that makes a gap? Like I just that is just a thought.
I personally don't think so. I've only ever found myself attracted to women who are strong and independent, and not in the independent sense of like I don't need a man, but in independent sense of like I have a purpose,
Mm,
I have drive, I am trying to make my life better. I'm not waiting. I'm not just sitting around doing nothing, but
mhm,
I'm active in my life in the community, being active in the gym, I'm doing things like that. And I think that partly comes from being around five sisters who my mom and um, eh, has set that example for obviously my sisters and myself, and what I expect well, not really expect, but what I would like out of a woman is, my mom is a very independent thinker. She's a very critical thinker. She's well read. She's worked her whole life
yeah,
at various jobs. She was in the police department. She worked as a dispatcher. So for me, no, I don't look, if a woman was, extremely successful, I'd be like, love that. Let's
mhm.
make some money and right on. Uh,
Right.
but at the same time, for myself, then I would also present this early on in the relationship, which I have in different relationships in my life, where it's like, hey, if we do have the opportunity and we start having kids, uh, for you to stay home and take care of them, that would be the ultimate goal. Why? Because
Mm,
I don't like the school system. I want them to be, I want biblical viewpoints to be instilled inside their lives. But again, if that's not possible, then it's not possible. And if we trust the school system to do it, then hey, we'll make that decision together. But for me, no, I don't view that as a negative, and I don't view that as a place where I can't enter into because I feel like they don't need me. I view it as a place of like I'm attracted to that. Why? Because I view myself as that. Like I view
Yes.
myself as a
Thank you.
go-getter, a
Yeah.
doer, um, someone who is in the worldly sense, I will say just trying to make money, trying to provide, trying to save. I bought a house 3 years ago. You know, I have a full-time job. I went to college. I did these things. I work out. I take care of myself.
Yep.
So like I would want to um, partner with someone in that regard and
I
that
got
has like that those same ambitions.
you.
Uh, so and again though, I'm not saying like that's all that I've been attracted to, or like if someone comes in my life that doesn't meet all those requirements that I would be opposed to getting to know them. But
Yeah.
um, that's I don't know if that answers your question. I was kind of long-winded in that regard.
No, it completely answers it. I think it's so good what you just said about having shared interests. I believe like what you've done in your own life is something that makes sense for something that you might look for. A lot of times, I think it's so unhealthy when someone hasn't done all those things and they're like expecting that. Like I go to the gym, I get up at 3:30 and go get there by like 4. And it's so nice, it's so empty. But my whole point is if I'm wanting a husband that I like if I was not going to the gym and I'm wanting a husband that does go to the gym, well, how does that make any sense? You know what I mean? If I'm wanting someone that is well to do in like their work ethic, and I'm like, oh, I don't care about my work ethic. Like
Yeah,
these things. So I think it's so interesting. Like people want something, but they're not doing it on their end. You have to make sure that some of the things that you are looking for, you also possess too. Doesn't mean all of them you're going to have, but because there's parts that you need from another person that you've never done before, I believe, and vice versa, so that you can help each other. But yeah, that was a good answer. I love that. I like that you're on my show now. Just
yeah.
kidding.
I think it's important too because you know if I wanted uh, obviously if I'm attracted to a girl that takes care of herself and then I am a complete slob, like, and then how am I gonna just sit there and expect, you know, that I'm gonna attract um what I'm attracted to if I'm not, you know, replicating what they do. So,
Yeah,
and I don't have common interests as they do. Uh, so I think that's yeah, it's it's like you got to take some ownership and some self, you know, reflective, look through a self-reflective lens of how wh why am I not, or why am I, let's say, why am I not attracting people that I'm attracted to, and why am I attracting people that I'm not attracted to? And
mm,
sometimes those things aren't always in your, you know, control, but sometimes they are. And
that's good. That's real. I like what you just said there. Just because I'm throwing this out, one of the things I found out for me that I had to root out was I like to help people. So initially, what would oftentimes come towards me were guys that needed help. And I'm a person that's like, oh, I can help this person. No, no, no. I had to learn it wasn't selfish to almost say, how is that person going to help me? Because I
mhm,
can help anyone. I love to do that. But
yeah.
that changed when I started going, no, I need someone who's going to actually like speak into my life. And there's a difference there because that's not a partnership if you're the only person and it's one sided, you know? So I like what you said there. That's very fair.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's the way God designed it, is that, you know, we need to be working in unison and being able to um, build up one another in that, you know, especially in marriage. But I mean, that's why the pastors, whenever, you know, they go out and they pioneer and they're missionaries, the first person they always thank is their wives, you
Yeah.
know, um, because the wives are the encouragement, the wives are building them up and keeping them on course and helping them and struggling with them. Uh, you know, and if you're gonna, that's why I mean the Bible is, you know, the handbook for all of this, where, you know, don't be unequally yoked. I mean, if
Yeah.
you're going to go after someone that has zero common interests, especially when it comes to faith, dude, you're setting yourself up for failure, for
Yes.
heartache, for problems.
Yeah.
And and for me too, when I look at that some problems that I've encountered is, where our fellowship is very unique, but even like how we view Christianity and what it means to be a Christian is kind of becoming more unique these days in its own right, because we're coming across so much cultural Christianity, progressive Christianity. And so when
Yeah.
it comes to like even the dating world, especially in the Bible Belt, where you come across women who are Christians, and I'll use air quotes, and I don't mean that to be mean, but then you get to know them, and it's really just a cultural Christianity. They still go out, they still drink, they still cuss, they still sleep around, and all these different things. And so then you're like, well, do I want to battle this? Do I want to fight this? Or I'm just gonna kind of not really deal with that at all. I don't really want to have to, because you're becoming unequally yoked. Why am I going to sit here trying to convince you that getting drunk is not a good thing?
Yeah.
I don't want to fight that. That has to be your own revelation. That has to be something that God deals with you on. And, I don't want to, fight that battle.
Yeah. That's
So be it.
crazy. It's almost like when you meet someone, you have to kind of see what their morals and your morals actually are. Like to actually know that what you consider to be appropriate or inappropriate, they agree with almost. You know what I mean? Because like what you just described there is like someone being like, oh, yeah, I'm a Christian, but then they're still going out and doing all these other things. It's like, you're like, I thought the title Christian kind of came with all these things included.
Yeah.
Now you're gonna have to like check off the list and see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've noticed for myself is I have done long distance with other Christians, but not that aren't in our fellowship, and it hasn't obviously worked out for me. But one of the things I have noticed in our fellowship is how long distance has worked for some people is that there is a a common, like, you don't have to know them to like the deepest darkest secret to marry them. And I'll just use Abigail and Adrian as the most recent example. My sister and her husband that just recently got married in March, you know, they were long distance. He lives in LA, she lived here. But they're both in the fellowship. So there's like that common, like, you're getting to know the person, but you already off the jump know so much about them. You know how
Yeah.
they view leadership, you know how they view male
Yeah.
authority, you know how they view pastors, and you know how they view church, you know how they view Christ and the relationship with Christ and the foundation that they're building their lives on. You know so much about them
Yeah.
already just from dating within the fellowship.
Hmm.
And so when you step out of that, then it's like, okay, now I'm gonna have no, and again, I'm not saying that you have to date in the fellowship or anything like that, but I'm saying that like that already sets, a great foundation for you
Yeah. Yes.
to build upon.
Yep. I agree. No, I think it makes it easier.
Oh
I
yeah,
think I'm telling you, especially like as you get older, like literally, I would say like in the 20s, you're like, oh, thinking it's not a big deal or whatever in terms of just like that mindset that you have that's kind of like childlike. But then as you get older and you really establish like who you are and knowing who you are, you really do want that fundamental principle of going, okay, whoever this other person that God's going to join next to me, I want it to be like that we're on the same mindset. And that eliminates a lot of noise within that realm of going, okay, we're in the fellowship. This makes sense. We have understanding here, you know? And I like that. I think I used to kind of use it against myself that I was a pastor's kid because I was like, well, if you're a pastor's kid, people are either not going to approach you or are they approaching you because you're a pastor's kid and that's the only reason it's for some sort of clout, or is it, all this stuff. But like as I've gotten older, I'm like, I think it's almost like a crown on our heads in a beautiful way because it's like there is a standard. You're not just going to go and come up and act wild when you know good and well that that person is a pastor's child, that you are going to have to regard things a certain way if you're in the fellowship. If you're
yeah,
outside of the fellowship talking to a pastor's child, it's going to be totally different where they're like, I don't care. Like,
yeah, yeah,
you know what I mean? So it's an interesting, like, toss up, I guess, so to speak. But I think in the fellowship is definitely easier, what I'd say.
yeah. Without a doubt, I agree. Georgia, you told me a certain time that you needed to go, and so I wanted to again be respectful of that. And I appreciate you coming on. Was there anything else that you wanted to touch on, or any other thoughts that you wanted to get out there for the world to chew on?
um I think just start enjoying your life more, what you have right in front of you. I
Mm,
would say, when you're driving and you're seeing the trees and you put on your favorite songs, really like be present to the moment. Don't just eat your food and shove it down your throat. Really eat with intention of like make a meal that's beautiful, what it is that you're eating when you're working out. Realize that it's therapeutic. It's not some battering of yourself. Like you're just doing this because you have to. Do it because you want to. You can breathe, you can live. Hang out with people that are like minded to you and some that aren't. So it sharpens you on both ends.
yeah,
And um, really start to just enjoy life because it's really beautiful and it goes so quick. Like, your parents tell you this when you're young, and then you're like, oh, they weren't joking. Like it
yeah.
does. So I just think my overall message is like to take that seriously and enjoy your life, and yeah, have let God's will be done in your life too, ultimately, so that you live the best life you can.
I love that. I think that's a great place to end. Georgia Smith, where can people find you if they wanted to reach out and maybe get a hold of you, maybe set something up?
Okay, so you can there's the office number is, do I just give it here? So
Sure.
funny. Okay, so the office number would be 520-429-4660. And that's a place you can always call into. We do have a website, mentalfinesse.com. And also our Instagram handle is mental finesse, mental underscore finesse underscore. And that's an easy way to find us too.
Okay, I love it. So if anyone wants to reach out, um, Georgia has clearly made herself available at all hours of the day. No, I'm just kidding. At 2 in the
Yeah.
morning, you can call that number and she will be right there ready to talk to you. But no, I appreciate it, Georgia. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope you were encouraged. I hope you were blessed, and I will see you next time.